You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Gavin, we are back again. I think you might have said that we were entering a new year.
We are not quite. This is our final 1966. I mean, it'll roll over into 67. None of the... I have this set up where I'm doing, 4 per year. But keep in mind, like in no case... I shouldn't say no case, but in not many cases is something going to start and end all within one year. So
you can't really control it that way.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. So I'm calling this the final one of 66, but it does roll over a little bit into 67.
All right. So what are we talking about?
We're going to talk about Warren Rasmussen.
Warren Rasmussen?
Yeah.
Okay.
This will be the first and last time we're ever going to hear about Warren Rasmussen.
All right.
So it's kind of a one-off. But I actually wanted to bring up two totally unrelated things first, if that's okay.
Yeah. Well, it's your podcast, so you can do whatever you want.
Okay. So first of all, at the time of this recording, they had just unveiled a new statue at the state capitol, and the statue is of Vel Phillips. And Vel Phillips was a politician who came up through Milwaukee and was very successful and well-liked. And we might do something with Vel Phillips in the future. The reason for that, and I want to be very clear, Vel Phillips, not a criminal, not a bad person, but in her early days as a Milwaukee politician, she did hang out at Bell Street nightclubs. Mm-hmm. So her name does come up in the FBI files just for hanging out there. So it's kind of interesting to me that like she's hanging out with the mob guys, and then later on she's like...
So she's not only hanging out at the clubs, but she's also being seen with mob members?
Yeah, not like in a shady way, but
just hanging out.
But she knows who Frank is, and yeah. Okay. So I'm like, maybe there's a story there. We'll see.
But now, before you go on, I just want to ask this question. Is it reasonable to say that most politicians are going to know who Frank Balistrieri is just because...
Not necessarily on a personal level.
Okay.
They're going to know who he is as an individual.
Because he's a prominent business owner.
Yeah.
But it's not like a...
But she knows him well enough where, like, when he goes to prison, she writes a letter being like, Frank's not a bad guy. Mm-hmm. Be nice to Frank. You know, that kind of a thing. Where she's a character witness. So she knows him on a more personal level. Okay. The other thing is, every so often, the FBI, like, reaches out to me. And they're like, hey, you realize you've got like a ton of requests that are like backlogged for a long time? And I'm like, yeah, I totally know. And they're like, are you still interested in this one or should we drop it? This is their tactic to like try to...
Good job,
clear
FBI.
clear up their backlog. And I'm always like, yeah, no, I'm still interested. But then the other thing they do is they explain that they've got different tracks. They've got like small, medium, large, extra large. I don't remember what they all are, but the different tracks based on the size of the files. Mm-hmm. And the bigger the file is, the longer it'll take. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but now that they're like, if it's in the large one, it could take this long. And it's long, So they're like, you could reduce your scope and get it into the smaller track and you'll get it sooner. I will tell people, I have started to do that.
Okay.
That I have started to do.
So when you say reduce the scope, are you just asking for like certain components of a person's file or something?
Pretty much they do it by section. So like a recent example I got was they asked me about a man named Ben Barwick. And Ben Barwick was involved in the hotel and restaurant employees union. And they have, I think it's 830 pages or something. And they're like, we can get it to you quicker if you want to drop it down to 500 pages. So they just kind of stop at the first 500 pages. And I'm like, fine. And I've done that with a few lately. The thing of it is like, I want the whole file. Mm-hmm. But for the purposes of this podcast, it's going to be a lot more useful if I get 500 pages in the next year rather than 800 pages 5 years from now.
God, and this is why I would never be able to do what you do, Gavin, because this would drive me nuts. It's like...
It drives me nuts because when I started doing this, 13 years ago now? I don't even remember. Probably longer. Whenever I started doing this, you put in a request in like a long turnaround time would be like 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have some, this is no exaggeration, I have some that have been waiting for 7 freaking years.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened. I'm sure it's just a matter of, how many employees are working on things. I'm sure that's the simple answer.
Well, I'd be willing to bet you that it's just that because of the internet, the need for data has just gone through the roof, and I think there's probably 20 times as many researchers
I think there's more requesters and fewer employees handling them.
Yeah.
But it's like, ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing where there's no situation where it should take years to respond. And so I've come to the conclusion where I'm like, I'm just going to have to reduce because you can always go back later and say, can you pick up where you left off?
Mm-hmm.
But for the purposes of this podcast, like, it's not going to do me any good if I get a file in 5 years and then I'm like, oh yeah, we were going to talk about that like 3 years ago. Then what do I do? I'm still glad I have it. I'll do something with it, but.
Yeah, and I guess maybe what you should be doing is requesting every file 200 pages at a time or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and then as soon as you get the first 200 pages, you go back and request the next 200 pages so that, just because, so it's coming in regularly instead of, because like, let's face it, man, sitting 7 years, that's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
I mean,
I'm not mad about it. I'm sure some people get really mad because like legally by statute, they're not supposed to be able to do that. There are deadlines on turnaround times. I don't get mad about it. Like, I understand where they're coming from, especially now that my day job is I work for the government and I get people information. Like, my turnaround time is 2 days. So I'm good. I'm good. But I get it. If I was dealing with the levels of crap they're dealing with, I would understand the frustration. So, like, I don't get mad about it. But it does definitely reduce my ability to get things out in a timely manner for people. So, but anyway, that's a whole tangent. The only point I wanted to make about that is that I've started to reduce my scope of some of my requests and try to get things in quicker, which should hopefully improve the podcast. Not that I think the podcast would be great either way, but it should get the information to me quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Warren Rasmussen.
We are now 8 minutes in and we're finally starting the podcast.
Yeah. Warren Rasmussen first comes to the FBI's attention in September 1965 when they received a tip that he was distributing football parlay tickets. Oh, no.
What is a football parlay ticket?
A parlay ticket, today we would call it like a pool, like a football pool. They hear about this. First, they can't verify it, but they make a note. April 1966, months later, both an anonymous caller and the state attorney general's office informed the FBI that Rasmussen is distributing gambling material. They said, this guy he's working out of 2 taverns in the Kenosha area, the Idle Hour and Penrod's. So they're like, okay. The FBI starts getting some background information on Rasmussen. He was the former president of the Kenosha Board of Realtors, but he lost his license due to several fraudulent practices, including misappropriation of insurance premium receipts, notarizing forged signatures, and more. He had been earning $10,000 annually, which is a very good salary in the 60s. A check with the credit bureau showed that he was president of Union Loan, but this was only on paper. He made no income from this, and it wasn't really clear what Union Loan did.
All right.
Yeah. In his younger years, he had been an electrician for American Motor, but that had been a long time ago. The state is looking into Rasmussen. They have an undercover agent who goes in and talks to Rasmussen and gets to hear more about his gambling operation. Rasmussen tells this agent that he gets baseball jar tickets, and I'm not exactly sure what a jar ticket is, gets baseball jar tickets in from Iowa, but didn't go into further detail on that. He said that he only picked up one batch per season. He was moving more into the football parlay card business, which were printed locally. He would pick them up from the printer in Milwaukee on Mondays, distribute them on Tuesdays, selling them for $15 for 300 sheets, which isn't bad. I mean, because this is just pieces of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to placing his print order, Rasmussen called Texas and Detroit to get 2 different sets of odds, and then adjusted his cards accordingly based on the 2 different sets of odds that he got. The agent suggested to the FBI that it might be worth getting Rasmussen to ship orders to an FBI agent out of state. But the FBI resisted this and said they would rather find an interstate link if one existed naturally. The state agent said that in addition to gambling paraphernalia and insurance, he thought that Rasmussen apparently ran an antique store in Chicago and a pet shop in Milwaukee. I wasn't able to verify this, and I don't know where he got that information. The FBI talks to the U.S. attorney about the state agent's idea of having them get somebody to request these cards be sent to them across state lines. And the U.S. attorney is in agreement with the FBI. He's like, please don't do that. He's like, that would make a really good case for entrapment, and we don't want that. Because if he's not currently sending things interstate and then we encourage him to do it, we can't prosecute that. It's like, don't do that.
Oh, wow.
Rasmussen then learns from a woman that the state agent who was working undercover was a state agent.
Well put.
Rasmussen doesn't like this, goes to the agent's apartment when he isn't home, and breaks in, finding his badge, his gun, handcuffs, and more. Rasmussen becomes panicky. Now that the agent was known to the tavern owners in Kenosha, it was possible somebody would have to pay for this fiasco, and the likely target would be Rasmussen. He's scared because he's introduced this guy to the gamblers in Kenosha, and he's like, oh, crap. I don't want to be the guy who let the undercover agent in. A few days later, the undercover agent calls Rasmussen to place a bet. The agent, at this point, knows that his cover is blown.
Okay.
He's figured this out that Rasmussen knows. But he's like, I'm just going to pretend as if it's not the case. So he places a bet to do what they call tickling the wire. And tickling the wire is kind of just to see how somebody reacts. Rasmussen took the bet and then said the agent had an envelope waiting for him at the idle hour with past winnings in it. The agent went to the idle hour, but there was no envelope there.
Okay.
So he's like, okay, Rasmussen's just messing with me now. He's like, he's not going to pay me for bets anymore. Through investigation, the local printer who was printing the cards was identified as Arthur Wick, who was operating the Fine Arts Press at 1012 North 3rd Street in Milwaukee. Wick was doing a good business. Taverns in Kenosha wanted the cards, but their previous source had been in Illinois, and the Illinois source was hesitant to supply them because of the constant John Doe investigations in Kenosha over gambling.
What are the, playing cards are we talking about here?
The football pool cards.
Okay, so they just got a card for their bet or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wick, in addition to being a printer, had a long and interesting history. As a teenager, Wick was in a gun battle at 2300 West Wisconsin in Milwaukee. This was in the 20s. While evading arrest for forging a $14 check.
Wow.
He shot and injured a patrolman in the chest, while Wick took a bullet in the thigh. Wick served time in the Green Bay Reformatory. He gets out of there, and then in March 1938, Wick was questioned about 100 paycheck forgeries, and trying to flee arrest for that, he shoots Detective Raymond Carlson in the head.
This sounds terrible, man.
With a .38 pistol. Carlson lost his left eye. After arresting Wick this time, they also pick up a few of his friends as part of what they called a forgery ring. At trial, 2 jurors received mailed threats that they would get their heads blown off if they convicted Wick, but this did not work, and Wick was sentenced to 30 years in Waupun. He was released 8 years later. 1 month after being released, he was caught having a woman pass forged checks for him. Out again in May 1956, he was sent back to prison for writing checks under a fake business name. So this guy, he's got a history of forging checks and
not really
and shooting
learning
people.
Yeah, not really learning from his mistakes either, right? So
yeah. So the FBI makes a note in the file. They're like, watch out for this Wick guy, and this is a quote. He might be kill crazy.
Wow. Kill crazy. Well, I mean, it's not a lie.
It's not, I mean, he's already shot 2 cops.
Yeah.
So it's not good. How you only serve 8 years in prison after shooting a cop in the head is beyond me.
And why you shoot a cop over a $14 check?
Yeah. But, all right. November 4th, 1966, there are what are called lightning raids in Milwaukee and Kenosha that rounded up 11 people connected to forged documents and betting cards after this investigation is wrapping up. To keep the raids secret, the state attorney general had the warrants issued in Walworth County rather than in Kenosha or Milwaukee. Judge Chris Serafin in Milwaukee did sign off on the warrants. To allow them to be local.
Mm-hmm.
Warren Rasmussen was picked up on a warrant charging him with dealing football parlay cards, possessing a pornographic movie, and conspiracy to commit forgery. The movie showed a man and a woman committing sodomy. Arthur Wick was also arrested and was accused of printing gambling cards and having pornography. The print shop allegedly also had 500 forged driver's licenses. At his arraignment, Judge Serafin asked if he had a previous record, and Wick said yes, for bad checks. The prosecutor said, I think your record has a little bit more than that. Wick then volunteered, oh, do you mean my police record? That was a long time ago. Evidence against Wick and Rasmussen included photos of them in the print shop, printing up the parlay cards. So They had been taking photos through the windows of these guys actually doing it. I would love to know more about the pornography part, just to be clear. Like, I love the fact that, like, pornography at this point in time is illegal.
When does pornography become legal?
Early 70s.
Okay.
Early 70s. And so I love that, like, they get arrested for this, and, like, the description is there's a man and a woman committing sodomy. That doesn't tell me what this is or how bad this is.
Yeah.
And I mean, no matter what, it's illegal at this point in time. But like, I don't know if they've got some weird freaky stuff going on here, or if this is now today would just be like the most boring
probably the
thing.
most boring thing you could have ever imagined.
Yeah. Other people arrested in the raid and charged with accepting bets were a beauty shop owner, several tavern owners in the Kenosha area. And an AMC employee, just randomly.
American Motor Company?
American Motor Company, yes.
I go to Appleton Medical Center, so...
Yes. In this case, AMC is the American Motor Company, the major employer of Kenosha when it existed. A week later, 16 more charges were filed against Rasmussen in Kenosha. They concerned running a lottery, in this case baseball pool cards, receiving horse bets, and transferring football parlay cards. The district attorney said this brought Rasmussen's charges to a total of 22, and he also issued warrants for 2 other Kenosha gamblers who were not necessarily connected to Rasmussen, but that were picked up during the same investigation. An informant to the FBI said that Chief Leo Buckman of Kenosha was a laughingstock following the recent lightning raids and displayed a real lack of intelligence. Buckman had apparently told the press that he was not aware of the raids until after they happened. The truth was more that he had been informed last minute, and he clearly knew because he had 6 of his men assisting the state agents during the arrest. Rather than saying he did not know, he could have merely said no comment and enjoyed the free positive publicity of the raids. Instead, he looked like he didn't know what was going on in his own community. The informant suspected Buckman was not so dumb as he was afraid because of the close ties between the hoodlums and the local government. Ooh. Yeah, which that's a whole other thing, but...
That's a future episode?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
More charges come down for Wick for forgery. In fact, even after the arrest, a state investigator gets Wick to print out 50 cashier's checks using the Midland National Bank as the name, and under the account of a fake man named John Seymour. So, Wick apparently is not very smart. And if you just ask him to print things, he'll print them for you. The district attorney moved to have the tavern license revoked for the idle hour because of the gambling on the premises. Specifically, they targeted the idle hour because the owner, a man named Felix Caro, and it's spelled like Cairo, like Egypt.
Okay.
I don't know if it's pronounced Cairo or Caro. So I apologize to the people at home. I highly doubt it's pronounced Cairo, like Egypt. But in case you hear me say Cairo and you're like, it's Caro, or I said Caro, you're like, it's Cairo. Either way. This guy, Felix, they get him as well. They get his tavern revoked, and he also gets charged with the gambling on the premises. The undercover state agent, now revealed to be Russell Nelson, testified at a preliminary hearing for Felix. He swore to receiving 300 football parlay cards from Rasmussen at the tavern for the purpose of reselling them. Nelson further said that he had made 4 bets with Felix directly between May and August of that year. He won on one occasion and received an envelope from Felix personally with his winnings. The defense attorney asked Nelson if he placed bets with anyone else while at the Idle Hour Tavern. He said, yes, I placed them with Warren Rasmussen. In fact, I made note of doing that 7 times. Not really sure why the defense attorney brought this up, because it did not help his client. Like, nothing about asking if other people were placing bets there made it that there were not bets taking place at the tavern. Mm-hmm. So I don't get that. The state tax agents handed over to the FBI a list of names and figures that were found at the Union Loan Office during the lightning raids. It was believed to be a list of gamblers and bets. It was not entirely clear because the names were all like written in code, and the numbers looked like bets, but it wasn't really clear because of the codes. Which this is pretty normal. Most of the time, like when they would take bookies' notes, they never wrote like people's actual names. They would write nicknames or initials. Sometimes it was really obvious. Like later on, there's going to be a guy named Michelli, and like so they wrote that his nickname was Matches. Mm-hmm. That wasn't a stretch to figure. Oh well, Matches is Michelli, but a lot of times like it's not clear at all who they are.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good practice to have because like, I mean, if they get a hold of one of these books and they're like, well, you bid it right here, and it's like, that says Matches. That's not me.
Right.
I'm sorry that I have a weird nickname, but you can't prove that Matches is me.
Right. You know? Right. Exactly. At the end of 1966, Arthur Wick has his preliminary hearing in Milwaukee. His attorney, Max Goldsmith, shows up, but Wick is nowhere to be found. The judge issues the bench warrant for his arrest. Soon, more forged checks from Wick begin turning up in Green Bay and Manitowoc. So, not only does he not show up for court, but there's more checks that were clearly made at his print shop showing up around the state. Within a week, rumors were flying around that he had fled to Chicago or maybe even South America.
Nice.
The FBI meets with the U.S. attorney to discuss the Rasmussen case. The U.S. attorney at this time says, he goes, I don't know that we have evidence to make a federal interstate case out of his gambling. It seems that he's mostly operating between Milwaukee and Kenosha, so he's like, just let the state agents handle this from here on out. So the FBI kind of steps back. And the attorney says, not only that, he's got so many charges against him in these two different counties. Let's just let that play out. Like, he might be going away for a while. Rasmussen's license to make small loans was revoked by the state banking commissioner. Doesn't really seem like he was doing much with the union loan office anyway, but they still they pulled that away from him. Upon further investigation during the revocation hearing, they found that the few loans he did give out were at interest rates that were higher than were allowed by law, which in other words means he was loan sharking in addition to his gambling. And I don't know the details of that investigation, but I'd be curious if he was giving loans out to the same people that he was doing the gambling business with, because that's not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely see that in Chicago, where like you get into a gambling debt, and then to get out of it, you go to the loan shark.
Mm-hmm.
But the loan shark, that doesn't really help you because you end up having to pay such high interest rates that you're paying almost double what you're supposed to actually be paying.
And it makes sense for a loan or for a gambler, a bookie, to become a loan shark because all of their clients need a loan shark once they start losing tons of money.
Right.
So,
yeah. April 1967. Wick has been unable to be found for several months. He's finally caught in Sheboygan while shopping at a Praney's.
Nice.
Additional charges were filed against him in Sheboygan for passing worthless checks at the Piggly Wiggly.
Nice.
Boom, boom, boom. Papers found on him at the time of arrest showed that he had been bouncing around, partially working at Elk Grove, Illinois, at a printer there under the name Art Wallace. Receipts also found on him showed that he had been shopping in Waukegan and Arlington Heights, Illinois. So he'd been bouncing back and forth between Illinois and Wisconsin for a while. Did not end up going to South America, so whoever thought that was going to happen was apparently wrong.
That was his first mistake right there.
Yeah. Warren Rasmussen finally goes to the Kenosha courts in September 1967. So it takes like a year for him to get to court. Following testimony from Agent Russell Nelson and other people, Rasmussen was convicted by the jury of 22 counts of gambling. His defense attorney was able to get Nelson to admit that he, Nelson, not Rasmussen, had initiated the bets, saying, "You asked him to place a bet. He didn't come to you and say, hey, do you want to place a bet?"
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't really matter. The defense also tried to sway the case by getting jurors removed from the jury if they had never played cards or never drank at a tavern during jury selection. But despite these efforts, it was not enough. He was found guilty of all the 22 counts of gambling, and the judge sentenced him to pay $7,600 or spend 18 months in jail. He was given 2 months to pay.
So he was either $7,000 or 18 months in jail.
Yeah.
I think I'd take the 18 months in jail because I think your conversion of $7,000 is going to be absurd.
I did not do the conversion, so I apologize to people for not doing the conversion.
But this is what, 67 you said?
67. So
it's probably
$7,000. Like, this is more than a lot of people's annual salary at the time.
It's probably like $20,000, $25,000 in today's money, I would think.
Yeah, I would say you're probably not too far off there.
And I mean, for 22 counts of anything, 18 months in prison seems pretty minor to me.
Yeah, the jail time is pretty low. The fine is pretty high. And given 2 months to pay, it's pretty quick for that amount of money. He then moves over to Milwaukee County, where he pleads guilty to his charges of forgery and possessing gambling material. The judge there, who was sitting in, dismissed the charge of possessing the obscene movie. He goes, I won't worry about that. Sentencing was delayed, waiting on a further investigation. Rasmussen was able to pay $2,500 of his $7,000 fine, He was granted a 1-week extension to get the other $5,000. Amazingly, he was able to do it.
Wow.
I don't know where he magically found $5,000 in a week.
He started forging and selling fake things again, right?
Yeah. Then finally the sentence for Milwaukee County came down, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Now, this is ridiculous. Let me tell you this. The grand total here was 34 counts of worthless checks, 3 counts of forgery. Many of those charges he was given 3 years in prison on, but the judge made them all run concurrently.
Okay.
If he would have made them run, like, consecutively...
he probably would have had, like, 200 years in jail.
Yeah, he would have had, like, a ridiculous amount of time. But he's like, oh, we'll just make them all run concurrently because you were doing them all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I get that, but it does sound like, oh, grand total of 4 years. Like, for this massive operation, that sounds piddly.
Yeah. Yeah, they probably because if they would have done it not concurrently or whatever you call that, it would have been like 300 years, which would have been ridiculous. But they probably should have, like, not done a little bit more than 4 years,
Yeah. In addition to the $7,000 fine in Kenosha and Milwaukee, Rasmussen is given another $4,000 fine. He is given 3 months to pay that. More generous timeline on that one. Or he would get 5 years in prison for not having paid the fine. The judge used this sentencing to make a bit of a speech. Quote, I have a great deal of difficulty in understanding how a man who is 54 years of age, who is a businessman, can become as greedy as you obviously have become in a desire to make money, regardless of whether you abide by the law or not. I don't think that 2 years or 10 years in Waupun would change your thinking one bit. I think you would come out there the same greedy, selfish man I see standing before me today. If there's anything that's going to get you out of the habit of doing illegal things, it is to hit you in the pocketbook. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was his reasoning for why these big fines had to come down and the low jail sentence.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess I can see that, but also, huge fines is going to make them desperate for money and might make them do this stupid shit again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And then after all these fines, so this is like total of like $11,000 in fines. In addition to that, then the IRS files a tax lien against Rasmussen, saying that he owed them back taxes of $14,000.
So this guy's just screwed, basically, at this point.
After that, he fades away. I don't know if he learned his lesson, but he doesn't ever get caught again.
Spends the rest of his life trying to pay back all the money.
Yeah. And he passes away November 1982 in Kenosha at 69 years old. So didn't live out a long life, but yeah. So
it's interesting.
Yeah, so that's our Warren Rasmussen story. Doesn't really tie into Milwaukee Mafia directly, but some of the Kenosha gamblers that he dealt with are, and I didn't even talk about them, but they're people who are going to come up in the future. If you want to see them, you can read the online notes.
Mm-hmm.
But he's definitely tied into the Kenosha gambling community
pretty tightly.
Yeah,
but no indication of any real ties to the mafia other than just associations with people because he's a gambler.
Right.
So
it's so years later, the FBI is talking to informants in Kenosha, and they're trying to get a sense of how things operate there, like mafia stuff operates there. And somebody says that years ago, Rasmussen was like the big mob connection in Kenosha for supplying things. But there's no evidence in the time of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't put a lot of
doing anything or anything like that.
I don't put a lot of stock in that informant, years, like decades later, being like, oh yeah, Rasmussen was the mob connection to getting this stuff out there. I don't buy that. Because
he could have been, but
he could have been, but it seems to me that they would have been able to find the connection between him and somebody, whereas this seemed like it was him and Wick. Basically, Rasmussen was operating the gambling end of it, and Wick was operating the printing end of it, and that was it. Mm-hmm. This seems like they knew a lot of the mob-connected gamblers because they were hanging out where gamblers hang out. Mm-hmm. But that was about the extent of it. I didn't see any evidence that he was like kicking money up to anybody.
Interesting. All right. So do we have anything else for this one? Got a sneak peek maybe for next week?
I can give you a sneak peek because...
Let's talk sneak peeks because those are always good.
Next time we're going to talk about Harry Kaminsky. And we've talked about Harry Kaminsky before. Have. But next time will be presumably the final time we talk about him because he's going to die. So just kind of getting caught up. We'll be in 1967 now.
And remind me, who is Harry Kaminsky?
Harry Kaminsky today is primarily remembered as a loan shark. He would give out loans to people at high interest rates. He was also involved in a number of shady business practices. He came up previously also because he had invested heavily in a gay bar.
Okay.
And so when the gay bar businesses started becoming more publicly known, mm-hmm. his name was attached
to him.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, everybody has that to look forward to. As always, we do have an email address. Where can they reach out to you with that?
You can reach out at MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. I check it a few times a week, make sure I don't get too backlogged. Yeah. I got a nice email just a few days ago that I'm going to be using as a Patreon question. So be sure to subscribe to the Patreon if you want to hear about that. I'll tell you, it was a John Dillinger question of all things. Oh,
yeah. I think I saw that question, actually, didn't I?
You may have. So if people want to hear about overlaps between the Mafia and John Dillinger, we'll be talking about that in an upcoming Patreon.
Yeah, and where do you find that Patreon, people are saying? And you find that at patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia, or you can just go to Milwaukee Mafia and find it somewhere on one of the banners.
I'm sure MilwaukeeMafia.com has a link to the Patreon. It must.
It certainly does. So
I dump things on there. I go in there and I say add page, and then I dump my notes in there. But I don't know what the front page looks like.
And if it doesn't have a link, somebody email us. Yeah. So we figure out who our web developer is and get that link added to the website. So
who is our web developer?
We don't know.
Oh.
We don't know. It's not the person that created the website, is it? Or maybe it is. I don't know.
I don't know. You know the guy who created the website. I don't even know who the guy is.
Oh, didn't I thought somebody else created. Yeah, I guess I do know the guy that created the website. I was thinking that was somebody else. But anyways.
I think I know who created GavinSchmitt.com.
That's who I thought created Milwaukee Mafia.
But I think Milwaukee Mafia was a guy that you know.
No, yes. You're right. So I guess that makes me the web developer now, damn it.
I mean, technically, I could do it too, but
who's got time?
Yeah,
right?
I don't want to mess with that too. I don't know the fancy new stuff. I know 1990s website development.
All right, so with that, we'll wrap this episode up. We'll be back in next week with a Patreon and in 2 weeks with a regular Mafia episode. We thank everybody for their continued support of this podcast. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey entrepreneurs and website owners, if you're ready to take your online presence to the next level, you need a reliable web host, and that's where HostGator comes in. HostGator is your one-stop solution for easy, affordable, and powerful web hosting. Whether you're launching a blog, an online store, or anything in between, HostGator's got you covered. Don't miss out on creating the website you've always wanted. Visit MilwaukeeMafia.com/HostGator today and let your online journey begin.